she was just trying to do her job. Crystal Hayes, a Black woman who had spent 6 years showing up early, staying late, and giving everything she had to 23 children who weren't even hers, was checking a little boy's seatbelt when the footsteps came up the bus stairs. Heavy, slow. The footsteps of a man who had never once been told no. Bradford Weston didn't ask. Men like Bradford never asked.
He pointed at her.
This beautiful Black woman with her gold cross and her worn canvas bag, and said 2 words like she was furniture he'd decided to move. Off the bus. He told her his name like it was a weapon. Told her he funded 40% of the school. Told her she would do what he said or clean out her desk. And Crystal? She picked up her bag. She walked down those stairs. She stood on that sidewalk in the Grandview sun and watched her bus, her responsibility, her children, pull away without her. Bradford was already laughing into his phone before she hit the bottom step. He never looked back. But someone else did. Across the street, inside a black Escalade with tinted windows, a Korean Mafia boss with a dragon tattooed up his neck sat completely still and watched every single second of it. He had built his empire in silence. He had outlasted men far more dangerous than Bradford Weston. And he had learned, a long time ago, that the people who believed money made them untouchable were always the easiest ones to remind that it didn't. What Bradford did to Crystal that morning would cost him everything. He just didn't know it yet. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The morning smelled like cut grass and expensive coffee. That was the thing about Grandview. It always smelled like money. The hedges were trimmed to the exact same height on every block. The driveways were sealed and spotless. Even the birds seemed to know their place, quiet and orderly in the oak trees that lined the boulevard like sentinels. Crystal Hayes had driven through Grandview every morning for 6 years without ever being invited to stay. She didn't mind, or rather, she had learned not to mind. There was a specific kind of peace that comes from accepting the invisible borders of the world you live in, and Crystal had made a study of it. She knew exactly where she was welcome and where she was tolerated. The school bus was neither. It was simply a responsibility. 23 children, 7:12 departure, 1 stop at Grandview, none of them hers, all of them depending on her in the quiet and uncelebrated way that only teachers and bus drivers understood. She was checking the seatbelt on a 7-year-old named Marcus when she heard the footsteps on the bus stairs. Heavy, unhurried. The footsteps of a man who had never once in his life considered that he might be unwelcome somewhere. Bradford Elliot Weston III had a face that had been handsome 20 years ago and had since become merely red. His hair was the color of old money, that particular shade of silver blonde that looks expensive in boardrooms and tired everywhere else. He wore a white polo shirt and khaki pants, and the expression of a man who had confused comfort with authority so long ago that the confusion was now permanent. He looked at Crystal the way certain men look at furniture they've decided to rearrange. "You," he said. She turned. "Off the bus." The silence that followed was the specific silence of 23 children understanding, before any adult did, that something wrong was happening. Crystal kept her voice even. She had practice. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't leave the children unattended." "My son missed the bus." He said it the way people say the sky is blue, as though the fact of it rearranged all other facts around it. "You're going to step off. Someone from the school will come drive." Simple. Sir, I have 23. I am Bradford Weston. The name landed like a gavel. I fund 40% of this institution. You will do what I'm telling you, or you will clean out your desk today. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Men like Bradford had learned long ago that volume was for people who weren't sure they'd be obeyed. Crystal looked at the 23 faces watching her. Small faces with large eyes, storing this moment in the place where children store the things adults do that they will never entirely forget. She picked up her bag. She walked down the bus stairs. She stood on the sidewalk of Grandview Boulevard in the morning sun with her beige canvas tote on her shoulder and her gold cross at her throat, and she watched the yellow school bus pull away from the curb without her. Bradford was already on his phone, back turned, laughing at something someone had said. He did not look back. Across the street, a black Escalade with tinted windows sat idling at a light that had turned green 30 seconds ago. Inside, a man in a charcoal suit looked out through the window with the stillness of someone who had spent a lifetime watching things before deciding what to do about them. The dragon tattoo on his neck caught the light once, brief and quiet, like a warning no one had asked for yet. Jung Min-ho watched Bradford Weston laugh. Then he looked at Crystal Hayes, standing alone on the sidewalk, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, not yet. Something older than anger. Something that had been waiting, very patiently, for exactly this kind of morning. He spoke 2 words to his driver. The Escalade moved. Junho moved like a man trained to be invisible. He crossed the street with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent years making difficult things appear simple, and he stopped 3 feet from Crystal with a black umbrella already open above his head, a gesture so precise and unexpected that she took a step back before she even registered what was happening. "Ma'am?" His voice was low and unhurried. "Mr. Jung would like to offer you a ride to the school." Crystal looked at the umbrella, then at Junho, then at the Escalade across the street, its windows still dark, still revealing nothing. "I don't know you," she said. "No, ma'am." "I don't know him." "No, ma'am." Junho tilted his head slightly. "He saw what happened. He thought you might need assistance." Crystal shifted her bag on her shoulder. The sun was already asserting itself over Grandview's manicured lawns, and she had 3 kilometers between herself and 23 children who were at this moment rolling toward school without their supervisor. Her phone showed $4.30 in her rideshare account. Not enough. Her feet knew the math before her mind finished calculating it. She looked at the Escalade one more time. Then she walked toward it. The interior smelled like cedar and something darker underneath. Leather, maybe? Or the particular stillness of a space where serious things were regularly discussed. Min-ho sat with his hands resting on his knees, looking forward. He did not turn when she got in, did not offer his hand, did not perform the small theater of courtesy that men usually deploy when they want something. He simply let her settle, and then he waited. Crystal sat with her bag on her lap and her spine straight and said nothing, because something about the silence in that car felt less like emptiness and more like a test she hadn't studied for. A full minute passed before he spoke. "He does that often?" Min-ho asked. His English was precise, slightly formal, each word chosen rather than habitual. He was still looking forward. Crystal considered lying, considered the vague professional deflection she had perfected over 6 years at Westbrook Academy. Then she looked at her own hands on the bag and thought of Marcus watching her walk down those bus stairs, and she said, "Often enough that nobody stops him." Min-ho nodded once. The nod of a man receiving confirmation of something he had already suspected. What is your name? Crystal? Crystal. He repeated it without inflection, filing it somewhere behind those dark, even eyes. I'm Minho. He didn't add anything to it. No title, no explanation, no attempt to make her comfortable with the fact of him. The suit, the tattoo curling up his neck like smoke, the car that cost more than her annual salary. He offered the name the way a man offers a hand in the dark, plainly and without apology. She arrived at school 4 minutes before the bus. Minho did not ask for her number, did not offer a card, did not say anything as she stepped out of the Escalade except to gesture to Junho, who held the door and nodded once as she passed. The small, respectful nod of a man who has been taught to recognize people worth respecting. The car pulled away before she reached the front steps. Inside, Minho looked out the rear window until the school disappeared from view. Then he turned to face forward again and said, very quietly, to no one in particular, Bradford Weston. Junho, in the front seat, did not need to ask why. I'll have everything by this evening, he said. Minho said nothing. He picked up his tea from the cup holder, ceramic, lidded, still warm, and took one slow sip, and looked at the road ahead with the expression of a man who has already decided the outcome of something and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. What Bradford Weston did not know, what he could not have known, standing on that Grandview sidewalk, laughing into his phone, was that the invisible architecture of debt and obligation that had built his world also connected, through 3 careful and deliberate links, to a man who had once watched the little girl not come home from school, and who had spent 20 years making sure that the people who thought money made them untouchable were reminded, occasionally and without ceremony, that it did not. The morning moved on. The birds in the Grandview Oaks resumed their quiet order. Bradford's SUV pulled out of his driveway and merged onto the freeway, and he drove to his office, and he took 3 meetings, and he did not think once about the woman he had put off a school bus. He had already forgotten her name. He had never learned it to begin with. The invitation arrived on a Thursday. It came the way serious things always came to men like Bradford Weston, through channels that felt legitimate, dressed in the language of opportunity. A private email from a holding company he vaguely recognized, a proposed partnership meeting regarding a commercial real estate development outside the city. 7 figures on the table, minimum. The kind of number that made a man stop reading and start nodding. Bradford's assistant confirmed the appointment. Bradford told his wife he'd be home late. Bradford wore his good watch. He did not do due diligence. Men like Bradford never did. Not on things that arrived looking like they were already his. The car that came for him was black and clean, and the driver spoke little, which Bradford interpreted as professionalism. He sat in the back with his phone, cycling through emails, occasionally glancing at the landscape shifting outside the window. The city gave way to suburbs. The suburbs gave way to highway. The highway gave way to something Bradford didn't immediately have a word for, a particular quality of emptiness that the American West produces when you've driven far enough from anything with a name. He looked up from his phone. There were no buildings. There were no exits. There was red earth and low scrub brush, and a sky so wide and blue it looked manufactured. And the road ahead was a straight line dissolving into distance. Where exactly is this property? Bradford asked. The driver said nothing. Hey, Bradford's voice sharpened. I asked you a question. The car slowed, then stopped, in the middle of nothing. The driver stepped out, walked to Bradford's door, opened it with the same professional efficiency with which he had done everything else, and stood to the side in a way that was not quite threatening and not quite anything else. Simply final. Bradford stepped out because there was nothing else to do. The heat hit him first, then the silence. The specific silence of a place where no human sound had any business carrying. The scrub brush moved in a dry wind. Somewhere very far away, something that might have been a hawk turned slow circles in the white sky. The car drove away. Bradford stood and watched it go with the particular paralysis of a man whose entire life had been constructed on the assumption that consequences were for other people. His mouth was open. His Ray-Bans were on his head. His good watch caught the sun and threw a small, bright coin of light into the dirt at his feet. He tried his phone. 1 bar. Then none. Then 1 again. Not enough. He turned in a slow circle, looking at every direction with the same result. Nothing, 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 and more nothing. And then, because there was nothing else available to him, Bradford Elliot Weston III began to walk. He walked in the direction the car had come from, which was west, which meant directly into the afternoon sun. His moccasins were not made for this. His polo shirt was not made for this. His body, soft from decades of car services and climate control and catered lunches, was spectacularly not made for this. Within 20 minutes, his face was the darkest red it had ever been. Within 40, he had stopped talking to himself, a habit he'd developed in the first 10 minutes as a way of managing the fear, because his mouth was too dry. He thought about Crystal Hayes exactly once during that walk. Not with guilt, with something more primitive, a dim and uncomfortable recognition, the way a man sometimes glimpses his own reflection in a window and doesn't immediately know it's him. He thought, she stood on that sidewalk for 3 kilometers in the heat. And then the thought dissolved, because his feet hurt and his vision was beginning to blur slightly at the edges, and there was no shade anywhere on earth. What Bradford could not know, standing in that enormous silence with his expensive watch and his useless phone, was that his coordinates had already been sent to the appropriate authorities, that this had always been the plan, that the desert was not a punishment designed to destroy him. It was designed to be exactly as long as it needed to be. Long enough for a man to understand, in his body rather than his mind, what it feels like to be left somewhere without recourse. The hawks circled. The sun moved west. Bradford walked. They found him at 4:57 in the afternoon. A state trooper and a paramedic, responding to an anonymous tip with coordinates so precise they drove directly to him without circling once. Bradford was sitting in the dirt when they arrived, not walking anymore, just sitting, his back to a dead shrub, his polo shirt dark with sweat, his moccasins beside him because somewhere in the 3rd hour, his feet had made a decision his pride had refused to. He looked up at the trooper with the eyes of a man who had been taken apart by something he couldn't name and hadn't yet found the language to reassemble himself. He could not explain what had happened. He tried, in the ambulance, at the hospital, in the careful, measured tones of a man accustomed to being believed, but every version of the story collapsed under its own weight. The holding company existed but had no record of the meeting. The driver existed in no database. The car had no plates anyone could trace. The email had been sent from a server that dissolved itself sometime between Bradford stepping into the car and Bradford being found in the desert. The detective assigned to the case wrote possible disorientation event in his notes and moved on. Bradford's wife came to the hospital. His business partner came. A lawyer came, because a lawyer always came. They listened to his account with careful faces and said the right things, and Bradford saw in their eyes, briefly, before they arranged their expressions back into concern, a flicker of something he recognized from boardrooms and quarterly reviews. The flicker of people doing math, recalculating. He had been powerful for so long that he had forgotten what it looked like when people began to doubt you. Now he remembered. It looked exactly like this. Like concern. Like support. Like everyone saying the right things while quietly updating their understanding of who you were. He withdrew his funding from Westbrook Academy 2 weeks later. His lawyer advised it. Too much exposure. Too many questions about the school bus incident that had apparently been witnessed by parents who had apparently talked, because things always traveled in Grandview, in the invisible channels of school pickups and neighborhood apps, and the low, continuous murmur of people who had nothing better to do than notice things. The withdrawal was framed as a strategic reallocation. Everyone understood what it meant. Crystal received the letter on a Tuesday morning. She read it twice at her kitchen table, with her coffee going cold beside her, and she felt something loosen in her chest. Not joy, exactly. Something quieter, the particular relief of a pressure you had stopped noticing because it had been there so long. The promotion came with it. Coordinator of Student Transportation. The salary increase was not dramatic, but it was real. And real was what she had always worked with. She did not know why it had happened. She had theories. Rumors moved through the school the way they always did, incomplete and half-true and pointed in the general direction of something. But she had no name, no evidence, no story she could tell in full. Only a card, small and white, kept in the inner pocket of her beige canvas tote alongside a chapstick and a photo of her mother. 4 Korean characters in black ink, written in a hand that was precise and unhurried. She had looked it up eventually. Young. Dragon. On an evening in late October, Crystal sat across from her friend Renee at a soul fusion restaurant downtown. Renee's choice, a birthday dinner, the kind of place that was too expensive and absolutely worth it. The maitre d' had led them to a table near the window, which Crystal was certain they hadn't reserved. But Renee was already looking at the menu, and Crystal let it go. She was lifting her water glass when she saw him. Far side of the restaurant, corner table. Alone, the way powerful men are alone. Not lonely, just separate, occupying a different atmosphere than the room around him. Charcoal suit, tea in a ceramic cup, the dragon tattoo catching the warm light of the restaurant like a signature. Minho looked up. Their eyes met across the room. He raised his cup. One small, unhurried movement. The way a man acknowledges a debt paid and a story closed. Crystal raised her glass. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them moved toward the other. There was nothing left to say. And they both understood this in the same moment. The way 2 people sometimes share a silence that contains more than conversation ever could. Renee looked up from the menu. You okay? Yeah, Crystal said. She set her glass down and picked up her menu and let the warm noise of the restaurant settle back around her. I'm good. And she was. For the first time in a long time, in the quiet, unannounced way that good things tend to arrive for people who never expected anyone to show up for them. She genuinely was. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been dismissed, talked over, or pushed aside by someone who assumed their money or their name gave them the right? And did anyone ever show up for you when you least expected it? Have you ever witnessed an injustice and stayed silent, not because you didn't care, but because you didn't believe anyone would listen? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and the quiet power of karma, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a part of our community and help the channel.